broadcast for History 232. We're looking at the Middle East from 1453 to the present, and I can hear you. So obviously, you probably can hear me, and you can see my screen. So we'll get started on what we have today. Updates and questions, and then the content presentation. I'm going to focus on Egypt, uh, Britain, the Sudan, and more specifically, the Anglo Egyptian Sudan. We'll do that, and we'll get into some of the questions that a number of you had concerning what is going on in Egypt. All right, so we know that the modules open on Monday, close everything on Saturday at 11:59. Sunday is my grading day. This is a week 8, module 8. The readings I have are pretty good readings because you're going to deal with Tel El Kabir, which is a battle, and it deals. The text material I have you reading is chapter 22 of a very good text, and the time period is going to be about 1882 to 1885. And it's important because it gives us an idea of where we are with Egypt today. This is where it's all going to start. Started with Mehmet Ali, who created what we put us on the path to modern Egypt. But then we see Egypt trying to do some other things here uh, as a still component of the Ottoman Empire, but yet foreign influence is pretty heavy because both the British and French are here, and they're really interested, of course, not in Egypt, but they say they are, but they're interested in the canal. They're interested in the canal in World War One, World War II, post World War II. The canal is the lifeline to India. It's the oil supplies and resources that Britain and the rest of Europe needs. The podcast also is very good because it's the Ottoman history and it deals with Britain and Egypt. And then I looked long and hard to find something for the media clip, and it's the Battle of Tel El Kabir, but it's the Martini and Henry, which is a piece of technology. I don't put too many of those in there, but it gives you an idea of what Britain was doing from a technological point of view in using military weaponry, and gives you a little bit of an insight. So that's kind of an interesting little media clip. Moves in a little bit different direction than some of the others, but it still gives you an idea from the uniforms and what was going on in that part of the world. Next week, week 9, I'm going to shift into what we call the Iranian constitutional reform. That's going to be, sort of post-Safavids as to what happens. Um, you see the collapse of these dynasties, and depending on who you read and what you read, people look at it. This is wonderful and now we're going to have something new. And what they end up with each time is something worse. So if you want to see from the Ottoman Empire and the dynasties in Egypt and the Safavids and all the others, the escalator is just going downstairs, and I'm not sure if they know where the button is to stop it, so they can turn around and walk back upstairs, because um, it's extant in the Middle East today, and a lot of people in the world sometimes don't recognize it. But maybe that model that they were trying to create, these independent nation states, it's an interesting model. It works in some places, but these areas, one, too small, um, unable to sustain huge militaries and air forces and do all the things that a larger area could do. And part of it is that they're limited resources. And you'll say, well, yes, they've got oil, but that's only one. And to get it out, uh, they needed help, and the British are gonna be there. Everybody's gonna be there helping them with oil to move forward. If you've got it and you can't get it out of the ground, you have to depend on others. So you get that foreign influence, and you get the British Navy protecting the Saudis for a while, and you get the French in Syria, and you get this all over. And so when the mechanism of a confederated system, which they did have an army and they did have a navy, and they had all those components, it's sort of driven from what the term we would use from the marketplace. So it's not there anymore, and so you end up with what we see today. And so next week I'll get into that with the Iranian constitutional reform. Web activity 4. you know, I have you do some maps, 3 maps of the Anglo Egyptian Sudan. Um, and those are important. The idea why these countries, these areas are joining together, and what is the role of the British. So, um, if you look hard, you can find maps. The best maps in the world are in map collections nobody really looks at. There's a number on the internet. I have a few, and the best maps of the Middle East were French maps, and they were done by an individual. He signed them BONE, and they're extremely detailed maps. And that's what you need. I'm more interested in real detailed maps so as you can see what's going on. And so the maps I use are just kind of a backdrop for you to give you an idea of what the area looks like. And they're drawn by others at different times in history. And there's a number. The best source on the internet to look is the University of Texas. And I used to know David Busseret, who was at the Newberry Library, who then left the Newberry and went to the University of Texas. I think he's probably retired by now, but if you, that's probably the finest online map collection that we have. The only other way to do that is have individuals draw it today, and they're too busy just doing digital and all that space material. But map creation is really a skill, and it helps. The right maps will take you to where you want to go, other than using some kind of a remote device that most people think's wonderful, but in the desert they're useless. The heat, they don't work. Compass, sun comes up, goes down, got that. In Egypt, the wind blows one way, blows south. Nile flows north, right? And with some basic things, you can function. Compasses will always work. The sun will always work. Technology doesn't. Um, and when you see a lot of it, if you go on those, you can't go in those areas anymore because of all this turmoil. You'll see all these abandoned phones and whatever they call the GPSs and things like that. No, they just don't work. Some of the military ones might for a while, but not in those conditions. Only the locals and people that have been there understand that. So at least you're going to look at some maps to give you some good ideas like that. The discussion activities and the web activities you've been working on are good. Some of the others that don't attend on a regular basis need to add more evidence um, from the textbook and the readings, and really expand on the discussion. So, keep adding material to that. Document case studies coming up tomorrow then is question 4 is the application of the civilization cycle. If you can get it in on Friday, that's fine. If you want to get it in on Saturday, that's okay too. That's fine. Next week, week from tomorrow's the 19th, question 5 is due. That's for chronology or a timeline. So what you do is pick out the most important dates relative to your document, same as we had last semester. So your document was created during a certain year. Who is ruler or the sultan or the Khedive or the pasha? Who's in charge of whatever area you have? When did that person? When was he born? When did he die? How long did he rule? Any contacts with the British or foreign outside influences? Timeline, I should have about 6 dates on it, no more than that. If it's got more than that, then you kind of stretched out of the document. What it is, it's to set it in time so you can see it on a timeline. This is where my document sits. Everything you put on the timeline should be before your document, because you don't know anything after your document, because the people that produced it didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. So 4 or 5 items, and I'll take a look at those. If you want to, you can draw it out on the computer, or uh, you can write it out and scan it in and upload it, however you want to do it. A short timeline. That's a week from today. All right. Research work, uh, keep um, moving forward on that. And if you want to find it, you can go just as a review into the main menu. You go to research, and in there you will find the civilization cycle. And I kind of modified it a little bit when I put it up there as to what I kind of wanted to emphasize for you for the course. And then you'll see the constructs there as well. So that'll be able to help you. You go to the assignments link in the main menu, and you'll see question 4. That'll be there so that you can then submit question 4 a Friday or a Saturday. So next week is week 9, and I'll get the essay questions going for you. I'll try to get them out a week in advance because week 10 we have the second examination, 3 essay questions just as we had before. So your goal is to keep reading, um, keep keep on those the textbook material, Goldschmidt on the articles because the exam questions are going to come focused on the articles. So the idea is that, and I know you folks have read them, but if others haven't read them and then they get the exam question, they're going to have to go read them to answer the exam question. So if you read them early, then you've got a little idea as to whether you want to answer that question or not. Uh, so take a look at them. You can get an idea of the kinds of questions that I'm going to have. Just right out of the syllabus, we're going to focus on Greek nationalism. We're going to focus on the Iranian constitution. Um, I'll pick up from where we left off with Mehmet Ali. There'll be a question on the significance of Tanzimat. I'll have a question of Abdulhamid II, one on the Anglo Egyptian Sudan, the Iranian Constitution, and then I'll bump us up to the Middle East in World War One. So those 5 areas, so I'll probably come up with maybe 10 questions, 15, something like that, plus the ones I've done in the sessions that you've been in. So if I give you exam questions here, they may or may not be on the printed form, but you can write on them anyway. And I can't use the recording system for others to access that because, a few minutes into it, the whole thing shuts down and it takes me 15 minutes to get it started again. So until they figure that out, and I just had the time to, I've called them about it, but it doesn't seem to be a high priority. Um, so can't have class for 10 minutes and then it shuts down and you can't hear, you can't see. I'm trying to get out of it, switch over to another browser to bring it up again. We lose 10, 15 minutes, and that's just not a good scenario. I don't think these systems are set up uh, for these recordings so that have to record the slides. So I reduced it down to 10 slides and still did the same thing. So they said, well, it's the number of slides. I said, okay. So I moved it down to 10 slides, 5 slides, one slide, and then 10 minutes into it, it just shuts down and bounces everybody out. And I'm not sure why, but other than Devin doing the recordings on the outside, there's no recordings there. Yep, good work, Devin. You've got those. Excellent. All right, so that's what we have lined up coming up for us. So, what questions do you have? Questions, comments, and then I'll give you the takeaway for today, and then we'll get into the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan.
Yeah, my only question was with the
Okay, anything
timeline.
comes up, let me know. You can interrupt, say, Professor Harkins, I got a question. Send me an email. Um,
Oh,
Collaborate
here
session
we go.
like that. Yeah,
Okay,
we're doing
sorry, I
fine.
didn't unmute myself there. Um, my
No,
only
go ahead.
question was on the timeline a little bit with this Anglo Egyptian thing. So I
Hmm.
know in the 1870s, like the rioting, uh, but when Urabi comes to power and stuff, are the British as ingrained in the Egyptian state as they are when they're talking about like the 1890s in that podcast? Or are they like
Hmm.
getting there?
You're there.
They're there.
I'm going to
Okay.
go into that today. Yeah, I'll do
Okay.
that for us. Yep, you're right. They are. All right, anything else?
That's it for me.
All right, so when you leave today, as a takeaway, you should be able to explain the role of Britain in Egypt and the Sudan and the creation of the Anglo Egyptian Sudan. And what's going on in Egypt, um, and why are the British there? Well, we'll know there's a lot of resources in Egypt. Um, and part is once the canal's there, that they want to protect the canal. But Egypt has been a mainstay. It's been Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad, and then the religious center, which of course is Istanbul. So when you leave today, and it'll be a good exam question, what was Britain doing in Egypt? And it's the period of Lord Cromer, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. Okay, so let me kind of move us through this a little bit, and I think um, it's a great period. And I spent a lot of time on it when we're in the face-to-face class. So there's the map that's ghosted in the background, and you can see where Egypt. This is Egypt becomes a core. If you looked at it, you can say, "Wow, look at that! There's a." It's in yes. from Cairo, the coastal area of Egypt, the expansion out. That's a core periphery model, and it's the British expanding out and look at the areas that they're interested in, and they protect basically to protect the trade. All right. So not only is the canal important to them, but trade coming out of the canal. All right. So the time of Napoleon, France saw Egypt and the Sudan as their sphere of influence. So there's going to be a struggle between France and Britain. And it still goes on all the way up to the Suez Crisis, to what Eisenhower did in '56. And I'll try to do that. I've done quite a bit of research on that modern period, which I call from the end of World War II as to what's going on in the Middle East with Nasser and this Middle Eastern security treaty organization they're trying to create. But here, right, before, during, and after the French Revolution, at the time of Napoleon, France is there, and Britain knows that. All right, and so starting in 1883 all the way up to right before World War I, Lord Cromer and Britain rule Egypt. And so from the end of the French Revolution, 1815 to 1883, it's this dual British French back and forth business until the British managed to get the French out. And then much later, the British and the French will join together because they want their share of the canal. Okay, how? Okay, how are they going to do that? Well, it's the same pattern. If you have a sphere of influence, you have to protect it. And we see it all through the world today. It's the same thing that's happening in Syria. It's all relevant. And what it is, it's an army of occupation. That's what the Russians are doing. They're all over parts of Syria, and they're not going home. And they're probably in other parts dressed up as others, or they've got surrogates working there. So one way that Britain's going to control Egypt and surrounding areas, including the Sudan and a crossover into areas of the Saudis in the Arabian Peninsula, is an army of occupation. Okay, and they're going to use this. Is that we have to restore political stability, and we have to restore the finances. And so they make arguments, but they're really not interested in political stability, and they're really not interested in restoring the finances. They're interested in control. It's a base, and they're worried about what's going to happen in other parts of the world, north of them, east and west of them. What they're interested in is what the Russians are up to in the Black Sea area, and so they're interested in what uh, the Austrian, Hungarians are up. They're interested in what all the other empires are doing. So one way they can do that is get in there and say, well, we're going to help you, get some political stability and restore some finances. Okay, all right. But the real reason is Britain is in Egypt to protect access to the canal. That's what she wants, and that's what she's going to do because that's their lifeline. The other main development in Egypt is that it's a tremendous granary. It's been that way. I've been that 3 or 4 times from Rome, and they produce the best cotton in the world. They advertise a lot of on television to get that. It's hard to get Egyptian cotton. Um, I'm not sure where it all goes today. Some of it goes here. A lot of it still goes to Britain. A lot of those beautiful uniforms that you see that are red like that, you feel them and you think it's wool. It's Egyptian cotton, long stapled cotton, very heavy. But it takes a huge amount of water. And of course, they've got the water sources right there to grow the cotton, to produce it. So it's very labor intense and it's very uneconomical. It costs a lot to produce cotton. We don't hear about it on the news. I usually go into it a little bit in the classes. Is that um, if you'd look at what it costs to produce cotton, you wouldn't buy any more cotton. You'd buy either synthetic or you'd buy wool. Plus, all the dyes that go into it are really not good. So, nobody, of course, is talking about that in the environment. People just go out and buy those and think it's great. It's bad. I mean, it'd be up there with climate change. It might even surpass climate change. I mean, it's like slavery of producing that cotton and what it costs to produce it. But Egypt does it today, and I'm not sure where it all goes. I know some of it goes here. So Britain's there for a variety of different reasons. All right. So British came at the time of Napoleon because they're looking for Napoleon, and we had the Battle of the Nile, Abcour Bay, and what happens is the French Navy is defeated. They went down. The ships are still there. The water is so murky that if you send anything down, you won't even be able to stand the pressure, the force of the Nile as it moves, as it flows north, and all the silt and everything that's in it. But the French ships are still there. Okay, so uh, Cromer is in Egypt. It's at the time of Ismail's rule. Okay, so he's coming in, and the French, of course, don't want the British there. Um, even this is after the French Revolution. This is we're getting the 1870s, 1880s. So what happens is the French are pressuring. They want the British out of there because they want control of Egypt. They use that. This whole canal is a big issue for them, and the French wanted Egypt to pay its existing debt, and they Egypt can't do it. You see, that's what happens in part of the empire. Um, Westernization and technology is never ending and it's costly. Um, many the Russians would use this story, and the story is that the Russians would tell us uh, that they could live without all of the things, all of the electric toasters and all that we use that uses up all that electricity, wash machines and all that. They could live without it. They didn't create that. That concept was borrowed from individuals in the Ottoman Empire. They don't want all that. It costs money. You get it all the time in your mailbox. A bill for gas, a bill for electricity, taxes, all they just keep coming and coming and coming. You think nothing of it. Well, if you didn't have any electricity and didn't need any, you wouldn't get that bill. And so what happens is Egypt and the rest of these Middle Eastern areas that are starting to fragment from the Ottomans uh, want railroads and they want some of these Western things in the West, especially Eastern Europeans too, loan them all the money and they put it all together. And you know what happens? They get in a lot of debt and they can't pay it back. And therefore, if you can't pay it back, we'll just come right in and take some territory, and you won't have to pay us a thing. We'll just, we'll take part of this area, and it's like a little colony of ours. And if you ever get the money, come and pay us. Well, so the French want the money because they know that the Egypt can't pay, right? To reduce the debt, um, Egypt then said, um, "Okay, we're going to have to, we'll have to get out of the Sudan because now we can't control the Sudan." So Egypt and the Sudan have a real interesting relationship. Uh, if you ever wanted to see what Egypt was like a long time ago, 600 years ago, you could go into the northern part of the Sudan. There's areas untouched in there, but lately, the last 20, 30 years, it's become a training ground for a certain group of people that we really don't have time to go into today. And so what happens is, okay, it's like, well, can't maintain this expansion, uh, over expansion, same thing, the model. And so they overexpand, so they're going to move out of the Sudan. Well, how do you think the Sudan felt about that? Like, hey, you just got here. We were working on these projects, and you know what we're doing? Um, you're just leaving us. Well, how in the world are we going to do this? Right? Okay. And in the Sudan, a series of rebels begin to take over because Egypt's leaving. Until now, the British are going to have to get involved in that. All right. So you see what happens. There's a mechanism. The mechanism is the French want their money. The Egyptians don't want them taking over territory, which they'd love to do and control. And of course, they take over the best and then say, you don't have to pay us the money back. But if you do get it, we might take it. But then there'll be more interest and all that. So, anyway, if you take the land, forget it ever getting it back. And so the idea is, well, Egypt's got to pull back. What Met Ali and the things he put together, and others got to pull out of the Sudan. The Sudan was moving forward, and it was becoming a peripheral area, and it was the technology and all the work and ideas from Egypt was flowing over into the Sudan, and then all of a sudden, Egypt says, "We're out of here because we need to use this money to pay the French so they can go home." And then when that happens, everybody it's just it's very chaotic. Rebels start up and Mohammed Ahmad comes in. Wow. hmm Oftentimes referred to as the Mahdi. All right. So in 1878, we have dual control. What is that? That is French and British. All right. Absolute dual control. All right. And so The French like that idea. The British like it, but you know what's going to happen. It's like a dual monarchy. It's like a triumvirate. It isn't going to work. Anytime anybody tells you, let's get three people to, to run this, and let's get two people, you might as well either take it or walk away from it because it isn't going to work. They don't work. Dual alliances don't work either. Triple alliances don't work. Okay. And so what are the British and French going to do? All right, everybody wants money. So we're going to supervise the revenue. That's canal revenue. That's trade revenue. So the British and French are going to do that. Well, the Egyptians don't have a whole lot to say about it because they want their money. It's the same thing we see with Theodore Roosevelt dealing with in the Venezuelan debt crisis. Um, you'll see it in Puerto Rico. You'll see it in all of these areas in the Caribbean, right off our coast in not only Latin America, but the same thing. These Europeans, Eastern Europeans as well, over there getting all these areas in, and when they can't pay, they want to take over their ports, their land, all that. Theodore Roosevelt is an interventionist. He's got to push them back. It's the same concept here. If you know how it works, you can see it worldwide like that. And so Egypt has got to say, all right, so we got the French and British here. So maybe they can play one off against another for a little while. The revenue that's coming in is going to go to the British and French. It's not going to go to Egypt like that. And so what happens is Israel loses control of Egypt, right? And I mean, you got two foreign powers there, and you got forces there, and the rest of the folks are working, and then we got trouble in the Sudan, and it doesn't look good. And so Ishmael's going to lose control of Egypt to two foreign powers. And then he dismisses the dual control. Not a good idea. But you have to admire them for it. It depends on when you want to stand and what you want to stand for. Because unless you've got the resources to take on the French and the British, who are ultimately responsible for the canal, um, what are you going to do? So don't want dual control. Okay. And so a new government is created with what? Nationalistic leanings. Sure. All the trappings of a state, of a country, of a nation. Okay. Egypt for the Egyptians. Okay. A new government. And so both the British and French kind of move that along. So a nationalistic government. All right. You see how this affects the system that's there, meaning Egypt, go back to Mehmet Ali, you go back to the Ottoman. You know, what are we doing here? We're moving to a nationalistic system. Well, it's like, wow, you should be able to tell me exactly what the nationalistic system is going to produce: a new constitution and an assembly of delegates. If I was there, I would have asked the Egyptians, is that what you want? Right? Do they want that? Okay. Well, and an assembly. Okay. You never had those things before. So the idea is that certain things, um, before you get communism and socialism and fascism, before all those things, those are like the dandelions of the world that come up. Before they come up, these Ottomans had a pretty good system of how they were working together with a confederated system. And now, when all of a sudden you had the same thing in Greece, Greek nationalism, right? And all the trouble in the Balkans. And now you have the same thing. Well, you have to have a new constitution. Well, why do we have to have a new constitution? What's that going to do for us? Well, everybody should have a constitution. Everybody should have an assembly of delegates. All these people should get in there and do those kinds of things. That is a cataclysmic shift and change for um, these people and also for the Sudanese. You wonder why they're in so much difficulty during the last from 1920, really from 1922 on and starting here, because you can see the fragmentation of it. And so Ishmael wants him gone because he's not interested in a new constitution and an assembly of delegates. You know, the power rests with, that like a governor, like a ruler of Egypt, like Mehmet Ali. And you can make it hereditary monarchy, but generally the people have gone on with that. I mean, if we go back a little further in history, way back, there was individuals called pharaohs, and that's how it was. Because, oh, that was terrible. Okay, well, what's going to do? How terrible is this system going to be? All right. So what do we have? Okay, British and French, yeah, get rid of Ishmael. That's all. Okay, so same kind of thing. You see it in the present day as well. We got to get rid of this one, get rid of that one, another one will come in, another one. So what they do is the individuals that come in become none other than puppets, surrogates of the larger uh, dual uh, control mechanism here, the British and French, or some other power on the outside. And the Russians are really good at that. I'm sure that in Syria today, the Russians have a Assad's listening to them because if they go home, things will change. So, um, and how do they do it? Istanbul sent a removal telegram. They're not going to do it. They're going to go to Istanbul, right? To the Sultan, and with a little bit of influence. And I like to read on that. And we could do more on it, but it's a class into itself of how these mechanisms work. And so it doesn't look like the duality is doing anything. Uh, Sent a telegram. Okay. Then Ishmael um, moves in his son, who's really interesting. So now you see somebody else coming in. Well, who's this somebody else? Well, in other words, as long as the person coming in is related to you, that's fine. But that person is going to uh, listen to of course, we don't control anything. We're just going to give advice. And so there's a, there's a transition of power. It's somewhat orderly, but it's enough power to move one out and another in. Okay. So Egypt is now under control of the Ottomans and the Europeans. Wow. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? And so what you have is these bases, as I call them, are being built in different parts of the Middle East. And the French will do it in Syria. The Russians will do it in the Balkans and the Black Sea area. So slowly, what you have is um, a movement. So it's coming. It's going to change. It's just slowly coming in, and you're going to see this transformation, which really then begins to pit people against people. Why? Well, because the Russians don't get along with this group, and another group doesn't get along with the Russians, and pretty soon the people that are living there have taken on the persona. Those people over there are bad, and the Russians are fine. The Austrians are saying the Russians are terrible. The people under Austrian control are going to say the Austrian people are now great. So the allegiances are going to move away from what we started to move into, where they were trying to get them to be supportive of the Ottomans, this great nationalistic fervor of the entire Ottoman Empire. Some of it'll still be there, but not enough to overcome this. So who is coming in? A new Khedive, Twifig. That's right. Okay. Tewfig. All right. So we've had an orderly transition of power. Um, British and French working with who? We know who they're working with, the Sultan. All right. Then what happens? Oh, the House and Assembly of Delegates are dissolved. Okay. So we'll get rid of that. That didn't work. Not the way we wanted it to work anyway. So let's get rid of that. A lot of people think that's good anyway because they really don't like that. That means you got to elect people, and then some people like the British, some like the French, some like both, and now the Egyptians are wondering what is all this? They can't get anything done. They're not used to this system, and for some it's fine, and for others it isn't. If you've lived in an area, your family group or ancestors for 500 or 1,000 years, and you've never had anything like that, you wonder how is this any better than any other mechanism? All right. So what comes in then is dual control is reestablished. So when Ishmael and others tried to create this nationalistic state and this fervor for it, and getting into constitution, a new constitution, and all of those things, you just can't come up with these constitutions every other time period and expect everybody, you know, you're all over the place. You can't, you're moving in different directions too quickly. People can't fathom all of that. And so now we got dual control. Remember what the British, when I first started, wanted? Okay, that's what they're going to do. Okay, really one control. That's the person. He's going to rule Egypt from about 1883 to about 1907. That's who it is. Mm-hmm. He is going to be there. Okay, it's called the 50-50 plan, but it's really not. Now, when this happens, the Egyptians figure it out. Some Sudanese, some from Arabia. There's a lot of different people in Egypt. I mean, everything we've gone through so far. There's Greeks there. There's Syrians there. They're just a great cosmopolitan. Um, some Libya, but basically there's not as many. The great tribal groups in Libya have stayed in part of that. They tend to move toward the western part, but this is Egypt. And so wow, what's going to happen now? Now they know really who's in control. Okay, birth of secret societies to do what? Get rid of the British and French. Hmm. Same thing we had during the American Revolution. Different groups to get rid of the British. Everybody's got these. Okay, groups. We've got to get rid of the British and French. And what do they want? They keep telling the people, well, we got to have this nationalistic things like that. And over time, they're going to believe a lot of that because they want to get rid of the British and French too. But what they'd like to go back is what they had before: routine, peace, order, and stability. What they things that you everybody seeks. They want to have happiness and joy. And boy, everybody'd like that. And just get rid of all this turmoil, get rid of all this virus, get rid of all this. And so just go out and you can get a cup of coffee or an ice cream cone and not worry about anything, masks and things like that. Well, at this time, a lot of these Egyptians, um, the changes have been too fast and too quick, and the debt and all of this. And so now these groups, in different parts of Egypt, and different classes of Egyptians, traders, and others get together and they start forming groups. Is that we got to find a way to move the British and the French out. Okay, and one individual that Devin is interested in is Colonel Ahmed Urabi. Okay, he's be a key player in this because there's going to be local Egyptian military that are going to be militaries always involved in a lot of these activities as well. And there's an Egyptian military, and the British, of course, supervise a lot of that. The French supervise a lot of it. Wow, what's happening here? Well, once we get to Cromer coming in, and one reasons why the British are there, there's economic decline in 1877, 78, and 79. Hmm. Not good. And then problems. When you get into economic decline, things aren't going too well. People don't have enough food. Jobs are tight at the areas of shipping grain, supplies, production's off, weather, turmoil, all of this. And so what happens, that leads to something. And what it leads to is um, near the end of all this, before Cromer comes in, Urabi presented the Khedive with three plans to get Egypt moving again, dealing with the dual control mechanism that's there. And so Urabi can talk to him and he explains some things and he says, here are three plans of what we need to do. Okay. Number one is we need to get rid of some of those ministers because they're not loyal to you. They're not loyal to Egypt. Uh, in a sense, they're loyal to everybody. They're loyal to the French and the British, the French and the British, and so they're all over the place. Wherever the wind's blowing, that's where they are. Wherever the power structure is, that's where they're going to support. Get in there, get the protection, right? Okay, so that's moving along. So the Kidev gets that. And what's the second one? Create a new assembly of delegates, the right kind, who have Egypt's interest at heart, um, who aren't bought, don't have special interest. See, a lot of their families go back in time from the British first being there, uh, before the French Revolution, even. So we're back to 1789, 1798, 1800. We're about 100 years back. So a lot of these individuals, sometimes they don't understand that when we deal with this history, that you know, it's just like in your family, it goes back 100 years, and you generally know who they dealt with and what they did. And you're saying, well, my grandfather or my great great grandmother was here, and this is what they did, and we inherited all of this, and we're not going to give it up. I mean, well, you were working with the British, or you're working with the French, or you're working with the Sultans group, and that. And so there's different types of. There's a three-part economic base in Egypt. There's a French economic base. There's a British economic base, and there's an Ottoman economic base. And for a long period of time, those three got along because people just traded in them. It's like going to three different supermarkets, but they still get their cornflakes from the same cornflake manufacturer, but it's just in a different box and a different name on it. Well, that's pretty much what's going on. Cotton's cotton. It depends on who buys it, who packages it, and where they sell it in the world. And so, as long as the Egyptians are getting paid, they're happy. Things are working well. But right now, we're in this transition period, and Urabi gave him, I've given you already two parts of this plan. This is a three-part plan of what he needs to do to get Egypt turned around. And the third one is increase the size of the army. All right. If you want Egypt to be Egypt, we got to move these French out and these British out. And Iraq probably cuts across a number of secret societies that are out there encouraging this. He probably talks to them saying, look, I'll get to death. We're going to get this going. And so what does Tweefig do? He agreed to all three. All right. Okay. That's good. He says, yeah, we got to do that. So they're slowly building, trying to build this. Now, what kind of state they would have created, we're really not sure because things aren't going to pan out the way everybody thinks they would. Uh, but remember, all of these areas, even today, uh, don't have the huge navies, the huge air forces, all of these weapons. They're trying to get them. They're saber rattling, missile rattling. You see the same thing. You see it in Iran. You see it in Korea. You see it all over. What is it going to get you? You just spend a lot of money for it. So they want something, and we're not sure what it is. Um, is it destruction of something? Um, if you look at the Middle East, the defined area is it's not as expansive, and so what happens to one area is going to happen to almost all of it, and so we just have to see. But here you're seeing the changes that come into place. So whoa, Urabi becomes the minister of war. Okay, all right, so we got a little plan coming along here. Things are starting to move in the right direction. That's good. Minister of War, right? Okay. So in 1882, this is right when Cromer's coming, and you'll see the transition here. The British and French are told to leave. That's a tough card to play. You got to give them credit for that. Tweefig, Urabi, right? hmm that's like, you know, today going into the Middle East and telling the Russians, tomorrow morning, we want you to leave, take everything, get out of the Middle East, everywhere. And then same thing to the Chinese, get out of the Middle East, no more trade. You can go on Saturday. And you'd probably say to me, "Is it who would never say that?" I mean, yeah, we could send a note to Putin, say, go home on tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. You'd never get there anyway. The note wouldn't get there. And so what they're doing is telling the British and French to leave. So I want to stress that because it's like, you got to be kidding me. They're telling them to do that. It's like us in 1763 telling the British and the colonies, would you please go home, and telling the French colonials here and the Spanish colonials, just go home. We've got some ideas of what we want to be, and we've got one general and one military leader, a colonel. He's given us a three-part plan, and you're going home. You're to leave. So when you read it, it's like, okay, the French told to leave, but that is a pretty firm message. And so what do the Ottomans think? Excuse me. What do the Ottomans think of this? Okay. 1882, the British told the French they would stay for a short period of time with a strong military so that you could leave. Okay. So, yeah. Now the British are playing. They have no intention of leaving. They just told the French. He said, well, we better, they don't want us here, so we're all going to leave. Okay, so in 1882, the British then deal with the French and said, look, why don't you go? We're just going to stay for a short period of time with a strong military to make sure all of our people are safe and we pull everybody out and we don't have any big backlash. Okay, why? Why did the British say that? Restore order and the authority of the Khedive. Seems to be all these secret groups out there. And do they really want to restore the authority of the Khedive, or do they want to move the authority of the Khedive to the position of the British? And so now the discussions take place, and the British do what they're supposed to do in encouraging the French. And the French buy this. And it's interesting to read the translated documents because they trusted the British on this one most of the time on this issue because they are going to leave like that. Britain then stated if they left, disorder would return worse than before. So that's why we want to stay to make sure, because we don't think the Khedive and this plan and what Urabi's doing is really good for Egypt. And we just don't want to see a lot of turmoil, a lot of fighting, people getting hurt, people getting killed. And, of course, the canal's important, but not as important as what would happen. Okay. And they're telling the French, look, if we left with you, uh, this disorder is going to happen and they'll call us back. So instead of us just leaving in mass, you can leave. If we need anything further help, we can call you back in. There's other places you can go, like Syria, which is other very close areas, right? They can move across what we call North Africa and go to French Morocco. Sure, they're so France has got other places to go. And so the British convinced them that if we all leave at the same time and pull out completely, there's going to be chaos, there's going to be turmoil. It could disrupt the canal trade. But what we don't want is all these people fighting because Egypt just really doesn't know what it wants to be at this time. All right. Okay. If they return, they may not be able to restore order. Wow. Everything could collapse. We'd have to be landing on the beaches again and doing all of this, and everything's going to prevent a total collapse. Then it's just, we really don't want to stay, but we're forced to stay. We just don't want to do it. And you can read the memos, the documents. They're all in the British archives. You can see the all documented as exactly what they're doing, and Parliament's informed. All this is moving along like that. Okay, what was at stake? Something's at stake. Very important. Okay, the control of the canal. That means if they both left, the canal would then return to total control by Egypt, by the Khedive, um, the semi governor general tied to the Ottomans. And just think if the Ottomans, the Sultan, would have had the revenue for the canal, how that revenue. Because what's interesting is if you look at the Sultan had an idea, and this idea was extant in the Middle East until the 1970s and 80s, and then they moved away from it. The idea was that if you understand the Ottomans, you would have known that revenue from the canal would have been shared with the entire empire. And that's what they were supposed to do with oil revenues, share it with all Middle Eastern countries. Did they do that? I don't think so. The Russians, the British, everybody else convinced them it's yours. No. You see, the Ottoman cultural perspective and how they operated much different. And so here was a little window where, but the Khedive, they really weren't strong enough to do this, and the Ottomans weren't strong enough to do it. But the idea is you share, it's like sharing the wealth. Egypt may not have liked that, but I think there was enough Egyptians there. The beliefs were, I think, would have been strong enough. Of course, those are our brothers and sisters throughout this empire. They've shared with us. We can share the revenue. They would have made a fortune out of that. That didn't happen, so we can't deal with it. I give you the insights of that's how they wanted to do it. That got the war going with Kuwait, the recent in the last 30 years, where um, these certain areas, the lost provinces, were supposed to share the oil with the rest of the Middle East, and of course they didn't, and that sparked war. Most people have no idea what they're fighting over oil. Why are they fighting among themselves? Because their belief system was that oil and the money and the revenue from that needed to be shared. And it was okay if one country took a little extra because it was there, but just don't throw us to the dogs here and we don't get anything out of it. And so that started the whole scenario, pitting them against each other. All right. So now, September 11th, 1880 through 1883, the rule of Egypt then fell to Cromer because the British aren't going. And that will last until 1907. And it'll be military occupation. Gladstone favored early withdrawal. See, this is where Britain's moving into this 19th century um, um, and 20th century liberal aspect that doesn't get them anywhere. Because a lot of the Egyptians that were there, even though they wanted them to go home, they really didn't because they knew that there'd be a fight over the canal, there'd be a fight among themselves. They just knew that was going to happen. The prize is too great. And the Ottomans didn't have enough of a control mechanism to come down with a canal force to control it. That's what the Ottomans were good at: roads, highways, all the canals. They built canals all over. And here's an opportunity. Well, this is another canal. And we'll make sure that our trade goes through and our people will get certain prices because we own it and maintain and control it. And the rest of the world will have to pay certain prices. And it'll be different. And so the whole mechanism of pricing is phenomenal like that. But it didn't happen for them. So Egypt needed to return to work. They had that economic downturn, so they want to get back to work. Cromer's there. The French leave. The British say, yes, we'll leave. They don't. They stay. They're there in control until 1907, and then they're there during World War I. And you'll see what happens after that. First problems the Cromer has to deal with when he comes in is they're spending too much money. So he's got to figure a way to cut the expenses. And he's going to do it. He's going to cut the expenses like that. Well, if you're getting certain things and all of a sudden now you're told that it's not going to happen, eh, there's no time for gradual. You just got to get in and do what you need to do to get the Egyptians back to work and stabilize the economy. Too many secret societies, too much turmoil going on. We know we got revenue coming, but a lot of the revenue for the canal is going to go back to London. That's where it's going to go. Okay, and they're going to move away from the idea of an Egyptian empire. So you can see from my map, everything's going to go back to the confines of pretty close to what modern day Egypt today. They're going to start moving out of Arabia. They're going to move out of, they're all the way down past the Sudan into parts of Africa. They're going to move away from the Horn. They're just going to pull back. And the empire was used to fund payments to France and get out of the hole that they got in for railroads and different types of improvements that they had to pay. And so when you get an economic downturn and you don't get enough selling enough grain, enough cotton like that, import, export, all those are sinking. You don't have enough revenue like that. Okay, so they're going to let loose the Sudan. It's a long about story. I could have just said, and Egypt lost the Sudan and then moved on, and you would have thought, okay, well that's good. They lost it. I don't know why, but anyway, okay. Now you know why. They didn't want to. They have an affinity with them. I mean, the pyramids that are there, the cultural history, at least with the northern part of the Sudan, Egypt, you couldn't tell the difference, other than if you cross the border. All right, 1889, the changes are working. Budget surplus. So Cromer isn't too bad. They kind of leave him alone, and he gets endeared to the Egyptians. And what he is one strong leader, and that's what they're used to. Okay, and as long as things are working, and
So
he's not
these
putting
problems are
money
all
in his
things.
pocket. Go ahead.
These problems are all things Cromer's addressing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Not all the British were bad, and not all were. I mean, it's just, in other words, he's put there to make it successful because he's an administrator. And so, what happens is you deal with these groups. There's no need to have any more secret societies. You can have them if you want, but we're not going anywhere. So we have to handle this problem. We got to get back to work. We got to pay the debt down, right? And he's going to organize it. So, in other words, they're not being taken advantage of by the French. They're not being taken advantage of because of the struggle between the French and the British. So the British are there. He starts there in about 1883, and it takes him about 5, 6 years. Um, they start to make revenue. Part of the problem is when Urabi and the rest of them got in there, there's a lot of graft and corruption. They've had that. Certain groups get certain things and others don't. So what they have to do is now they know that they're going to get a fair shake with him, and the people like that, and then they get back to work, grain production. You got British ships there. The cotton's going out, the grain's going out, money's coming in, people are paid. They can buy things. They're consumers, and so we get this little peace, order, and stability. They like it. They like the routine. Okay, the British are there. Well, they really don't like it, but hey, things are working, so let's not worry about it right now. Okay? Right. However, Tewfik died in 1892. All right. So he and Cromer got along to an extent. So there's another duality. Tewfik did certain things that were traditional and cultural to Egypt, which they liked, and Cromer is the administrator. He's like a prime minister, is what he is. But they never called him that. You won't find that anywhere. But in my view, he's doing the management of it, and he tends to listen to what the Kadev wants, and people understand that. They know that it's for real. He's actually talking to him, and he listens to him. And now there's respect and duality. And people like that. If you respect our leader, listen to him, everything's going to go. All right. He's succeeded by his son Abbas. All right. Oh boy. Now we see it. He would not accept British direction. Okay. So the relationship that his father had was a unique relationship because Tewfik saw what Urabi was trying to do. He saw the secret societies. He saw all of that. And he saw the British, the French leaving. That's good. We got rid of one. And the idea is that for a period of time, let people enjoy life without this constant churning. And so when a boss comes in, he won't accept it. And eventually he's going to bow to foreign demands because they're going to start leaning on him pretty heavily. Yeah. Yeah. And so what does he do? He goes back to the same system before. I'm going to turn to nationalism. We're going to nationalize everything, which means is what Nasser did years later. He nationalized the canal. Just take it over. So if I can build a nationalistic group, we can take over the canal and get all this revenue. Revenue from the canal is not going to solve all your problems. People are still going to have to go to work, right? Yeah, all the tolls on the tollway aren't going to solve all the toll problems. Not going to happen. No. Go. And what does he do? Oh my goodness. He's associated with the Young Turks. Mustafa Kamala. Okay. Now things are really starting to heat up. All right. You know what the Young Turks are up to? Those are the ones that gave Abdulhamid II a difficult time. But what they want to do is restore all the lost territory. Uh-oh. What's that mean to Egypt? Back to the Sudan, Arabia, back to the Horn. You know how much money that costs? You know how many people could die in that process? What it causes is instability and disorder. And people don't like it. You'd all like to go back to where we were a year ago before we got into all this. Everybody would. It's called all this turmoil for us. It's like, well, we got to get out of this. We just can't wait. And now they're going back to it. Uh-huh. British were unable to control the Egyptian press. They start publishing articles about how bad the British are and how we need to have nationalism. So they go on a propaganda campaign. Wow. All right, we got about another minute here, and then I'll wrap it up for you today. Abbas restored the authority of the Khedive to Egypt. Okay, he's taken back power. He's on his way. All right. In 1890, the British decided to retake the Sudan before he's going to do it. And this is going to be the creation of the Anglo British Sudan. Right? Why? To gain control of the Nile. Because we're not giving up control of the Nile. Not if Abbas wants to do that. We're going to take the Nile. It's going to protect the canal. So now we're on our way. The goal was not to restore Egyptian rule. So now you've got this breakage that takes place. All right? Wow. And this is the creation of the Anglo Egyptian Accord. All right? One more, and then we'll. The Ottoman claims are removed. So they're detached. So the British want to cut that so that they don't have to worry about the Ottomans coming in. So now we see Egypt floating by itself. It's out, right? and the Sudan is going to the British Governor General. So the British come in, and the British take the Sudan. Right? That's why it's called the Anglo Egyptian Sudan. It's a accord. So we got British control over both parts now. They got the Nile to protect the canal. Complete British control. All right. That's where I'm going to stop for today. All right. Good work. There's a lot here.